us today. He is a senior advisor of the Lincoln Project, a former chair of the Washington State Republican Party. He's also a former elected official. He was a state representative in the Washington State House. And he's been on the front lines of fighting for a center-right movement in the country, and right now trying to get Joe Biden elected. So, Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, and thank you for all you're doing. You know, you guys are heroes.
So will you tell us a little bit about how you're involved in the efforts to elect Joe Biden and why you think it's so important to get Biden elected in 2020?
Sure, and let me take a step back and start more at the beginning. I've been a Republican all my life. I was elected to the legislature, the King County Council. In 2016, I was the Republican nominee for the United States Senate. And throughout the primary season, I was telling everyone that it looks like Donald Trump's going to be the nominee, and I cannot support him. And I had a press conference in downtown Seattle the day after he won the Indiana primary and said, I cannot support this guy. My campaign was effectively dead at that point anyway, because with Biden with Trump at the top of the ticket, no Republican was going to get elected in Washington State, which was at best a purple state then, is now a bright blue state. Then I spent the 2018 cycle working for an organization called Unite America, trying to elect independents to office as an attempt, a precursor to creating a centrist third party in this country. That just didn't work. Voters, it turns out, are not really interested in electing independents who don't express any sort of coherent ideology. So, just as the presidential cycle really heated up, I got more and more and more active with the Never Trump movement. I know some of the consultants who are at the core of the Lincoln Project, and one of the first things they did is try to gather a group of senior advisors in addition to themselves. So I was one of the original senior advisors to the Lincoln Project. And then as each of these Never Trump movements has come up, I've joined them or volunteered or asked to help.
Yeah.
I'm also helping the Biden campaign with some policy development and some get out the vote. So I have a day job. I have to make money, but really I'm just obsessed with saving America by defeating Donald Trump, because I truly, truly believe that our democracy as we know it will not survive another 4 years of Donald Trump. He is an authoritarian, proto-fascist, who has no respect for the Constitution or the will of law. This is the most important election of our lifetime, and we have to win it. I cannot imagine. I don't know what we do if Trump actually is reelected. It simply can't happen.
Yeah, and so you've written really compellingly about this for the Niskanen Center, and I encourage folks that are watching to go read some of your articles. But you talk about competitive authoritarianism that we're seeing creep up through the Trump administration in the United States. And then I just want to read one of the quotes from an article you wrote. You said, if Trump wins re-election, we are virtually certain America will slip into some level of authoritarianism. We are just weeks away from the moment of maximum danger. So I guess that's your motivating pitch to get Republicans off the sidelines to go vote for Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty moderate former Republican, but even if you're not, even if you consider yourself pretty darn conservative, you got to at least stand up for the Constitution. And there is something happening in this world right now. It's happening all across Western democracies, where you're seeing what political scientists call competitive authoritarianism, which is a system that looks like a democracy, and they have elections. So it's in form, it's a democracy, but not in substance. What you're seeing in Belarus right now is a perfect example of that, taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
Or in Poland, or in Hungary, or of course in Russia. And that is how Donald Trump has governed. He has really exploited weaknesses in our constitutional system to govern as a monarch. He adopts unconstitutional executive orders that get challenged, but it takes years to get it resolved in the courts. He engages in clearly impeachable behavior, but the Democrats really don't want to impeach. When they finally do, the Republicans won't convict. And apparently you cannot prosecute a sitting president for things they're doing in their official duties. So there is no, I don't think most of us realize this. There is nothing in our Constitution to rein in a rogue authoritarian president. The only way to deal with him is to defeat him. He must lose this election.
And one of you are speaking about democracy reform, which I think there's now a broader consensus in 2020 to work on than there ever was before. During the Convention on Founding Principles, Governor Christine Todd Whitman gave a speech in which she said, America always goes through these periods where we always thought a president would serve 2 terms until FDR served 4. And then we introduced a constitutional amendment to curb the ability of a president to run after 2 terms to make it illegal. Then we always thought nepotism laws were very clear until JFK hired his brother to run the Justice Department. And then Congress enacted stronger nepotism laws. So what types of democracy reform would you like to see happen coming out of this era?
Yeah, it is time to talk about the elephant in the room. I've taught for a few years now at the University of Washington. For a while, I was teaching a class on the legislative relations, and the foundation of that is the Constitution. And I used to basically describe the American system, which is unique in the world, with all the checks and balances, separately elected executive, 2 houses of the legislature, bicameral, with the ability to veto each other, the president having a veto, and so on. It's a very unusual system, and it doesn't work anymore. It was designed by people who were afraid of a concentration of too much power in one strong leader. So what they did is they created a system, and they did not anticipate political parties. They created a system where if the 2 parties refused to cooperate, either can stop the other. So we are unable to pass a budget. We're unable to pass any major legislation. And worse than that, people who lose the election get to govern. I mean, there are far more Democrats in this country than there are Republicans. Democrats get far more votes nationwide than do Republicans. But because of the United States Senate, where Montana and Alaska have as many US senators as Florida and California, and because of the Electoral College, you have put more power in the minority. And people will say, well, that's just to create consensus. We need to bring people together and everybody. Great, if they would come together. That's how the system worked until recently. Now you have a system where Republicans and Democrats refuse to work together. So the minority can become the majority and then block anything from happening. I mean, those people back there now cannot agree on a COVID relief package when you've got millions of Americans who are about to get foreclosed on their rents. They can't make their payments. Local governments are going broke, but they can't agree on anything. So we don't need to tinker around the edges. I mean, I'm okay with ranked choice voting. That'd be a good move. We need to do much more than that. We need to get rid of the Electoral College, period. The most Americans should vote. Whoever gets the most votes is the president. That's how we elect everyone else. Now that's not likely to happen because, in fact, anything involving amending the Constitution is not likely to happen because the Republicans they're stupid, but they aren't stupid. They know that the only thing that maintains their power is our bizarre system with the Electoral College and the United States Senate. So they will resist all efforts to bring democracy to our democracy. So doing it by the Constitution, where you need a 2/3 vote of both houses, it's going to be very difficult. But there are other things we can do. So with Electoral College, what you can do is expand the size of the House of Representatives. Maybe add another 150 members of the House. Congress can do that via a bill. Now you expand the size of the Electoral College, probably putting more votes into states where there's more population. So that should happen. Second thing is the Democrats, if they take the Senate, and I believe they will, in fact, I think they may win the Senate by several seats, they need to screw up their courage and go to war and end the filibuster. There's nothing in the Constitution that says a minority of the United States Senate can block the entire rest of the government. It's nuts. And so let's expand the size of the House to make the Electoral College more fair. Let's add Puerto Rico as a state for sure, if they want to be, in any other U.S. territory. And let's expand the House. Which one didn't I cover? The House, or and get rid of the filibuster. Do all those things, and you get much closer to a real democracy where whoever gets the most votes can actually then govern. I don't think we can survive if we keep having governments not supported by the majority of the American people.
What interests me about all the proposals you just laid out is that it seems to me like you're preparing for a state of perpetual warfare between the two parties, where the only way we're going to be able to get something done in America is if we give the levers of power, we give the party in power easier access to all the levers of power. Do you agree with that characterization? And do you not think that we're going to be able to move to a less hyper-partisan atmosphere in the next 10 or 20 years?
There is no chance that we're going to move to a less hyper-partisan atmosphere. And I'll tell you why. I'm 58 years old. And when I started in this business, there wasn't that big a difference between Republicans and Democrats. And in the 1940s and 50s and into the early 60s, there really wasn't that big a difference between Republicans and Democrats. But then politics became about culture and values and race and religion. When I was the chairman of the Washington State Republican Party, if the Democrats even, and this was in the early 2000s, if the Democrats even hinted at putting language in their platform to allow for same-sex marriage or legalized marijuana, we'd put out a press release calling them a bunch of loony left crazies. Now that is the law of the land, supported by the United States Supreme Court and the vast majority of the American people. The culture has shifted tectonically. And most of us think that's a great thing. But for millions of Americans, it's the end of the world. I mean, the Republican Party's base is angry, white, non-college educated voters or born-again evangelical Protestants. And they are dramatically opposed to all the cultural changes happening in this country. Their views are very pro-police, if not openly racist. And you can have a compromise if you and I are just debating whether to cut spending 2% or 5%. That's, you can meet in the middle. But when you're debating whether or not abortion is murder, there is no middle ground. So there is no chance that we're going to have consensus and bring the two parties together. So here's what must happen is we have to end this era of divided government. Throughout most of American history, one party or the other was in charge. FDR had huge Democratic majorities, and that's why he was able to transform our government. But since Reagan, you've had neither party winning for the most part, most of the time, clear outright majorities. What I pray happens this election is the Democrats win a huge victory, take the House, take the Senate, take the White House, and then govern and change America and reach out to former Republicans like me and suburban college-educated voters and build a big, broad, center-left governing party in this country and relegate the Republicans to a tiny minority. Then maybe you'll see the Republicans come to their senses and try and move back to the center, and we can return to an era when both parties are relatively moderate and pursuing what I call, well, no, that's what I call, but one nation policies. Somebody's got to win the election.
Yeah, okay, I agree. The winning the election is first and foremost, but I want to back up to what you just said because I don't know if I heard you correctly. So it sounds to me like you're advocating for Democrats to win widely all elections up and down the ballot. And then you think Republicans are then going to become more extreme, or what's the role of our two-party system? How do we, so it sounds to me like you said Republicans are never going to get away from the culture wars and issues of abortion and guns. But then it sounded like at the end of your answer, you said there's hope that they might moderate. So what's your path, or what do you think is the path forward on that?
Yeah, never is a bad word. The better word is foreseeable. For the foreseeable future, as far as we can see, I don't see the Republicans abandoning Trumpism. Because this is what the base wants. My whole career, in Washington State, I would travel around the state, stand in front of Republican crowds, knowing they didn't really like me. They didn't like people like Senator Slade Gorton and our other candidates because they were all suburban moderates. And these are folks that were waiting for someone like Donald Trump. They are distrustful of the rest of the world. Globalism is a dirty word to them. They are ardently protectionist and isolationist and nativist, and the influence of religion, evangelical Protestant hardcore right wing views is very strong. This base exists. It's about 20. It's somewhere between 30 and 40% of the United States. It's not going away, and those people deserve to be represented. They should have a political party. And I think that they will continue to run the Republican Party. Look, I know for an absolute fact, I know members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, who despise Donald Trump and disagree with him, but they dare not vote against him or speak against him because they'll lose their seats, because the base is thoroughly Trumpified. I don't see that happening, even if they lose. I think the Republican Party will just become a permanent protest movement. Then it'll be up to the Democrats to decide, do they want to welcome in people like us and build a big party, or does the left win the ongoing civil war in the Democratic Party? If that happens, if Bernie had been the nominee, I think you'd see the formation of a third party right now. Okay. If the Democrats move way left, I know people, me being one of them, who would work to create a third centrist party. But I think the better, safer path to stability in this country is for the Democrats to become a center-left coalition that can actually govern. That's what I hope happens.
Great. Okay, so just to clarify, you would encourage the Never Trump movement and the Biden Republicans to become Democrats and try to fight for a center Democratic Party. Is that what you tell everyone on this call to do?
So that's really interesting. This election, we have created a new community. There is a new community of all these different groups: Republican Voters Against Trump, the Lincoln Project organization, 43 alumni for Biden, national security leaders for Biden. There is this huge new Never Trump movement, and it has political consultants. It has a think tank, the Niskanen Center, which I'm proud to be part of. And it is a community. It is a movement. It is not united on what comes next. I'm in a lot of these discussions about what we, right now it's just one thing: win the election, turn out the vote, beat Donald Trump. What comes next? There is broad disagreement. I mean, there are people in this movement who believe that they will never leave the Republican Party and will fight to try and reform it. There are others who have already left and will never go back. There's people who don't really even care. They just let's just win this election. That's going to be incredibly interesting as to what comes next. Okay. I believe it's very dependent on where the Democrats go. And then we will probably follow. But again, believe me, not everybody in this movement agrees with me at all.
Well, so what I want to do is spend the next couple moments that we have with you fleshing out what you'd like to see come next. And part of the reason why Biden Republicans was so excited to talk with you today was because you've already done some of this work. It's not just theoretical for you. You mentioned at the top of our rally that you spent some time in the 2018 elections trying to get centrist independents elected. And so I want to ask you to share some of your experience starting Washington independence. And you wrote in an article, quote, "We succeeded in fielding dozens of high quality, independent centrist candidates. We got them funding and professional campaign assistance, and they all lost. Most lost badly. The effort has now been largely abandoned." Okay, so those are your words describing what happened. So will you tell us a little bit more about what the mechanics of that effort look like and why you think they failed?
Yeah. So there's a professor who wrote a book called The Centrist Majority, and which he talked about how America needs a centrist party. And they went on to form an organization called the Centrist Project, which was later renamed Unite America. And I became aware of this in spring of 2017 while I was searching for somebody to become part of. I mean, there had to be a resistance somewhere, right, for people like us. And a lot of the people who had been close, including himself, Evan McMullen, who ran for president, joined Unite America. And the idea was that independents lose because they run crappy campaigns, that we need to basically form a political party for independents to get them the technical help they need and the money and everything else to run for office. So there was a meeting in Philadelphia, about 50 of us. I went, was very inspired, and I went home and I formed a Washington State branch of this called Washington Independence. And both at our local level to national level, we then set out to recruit people to run for office as independents and raise money and provided them professional campaign help. And by the summer of 2018, this thing felt like a growing movement. It was getting some national attention. There was a meeting in Denver, which felt a lot like a national convention. And we were really excited. But then we started doing some polling and finding that our candidates were polling in the low single digits. And on election day, they all got crushed, not just lost, got crushed. The best example was in Kansas, where we had a tremendous candidate named Greg Orman, who had run before for the United States Senate and got about 42% of the vote. And now he's running for governor against Chris Kobach, who's an extremely right-wing Trump person, who even, distasteful even for Kansas, and a Democrat. And the idea was people of Kansas are not going to vote for a Democrat, and they're not going to vote for Chris Kobach. They'll vote for Greg Orman. And he raised a ton of money. He was on TV. He ran a real campaign. He was in the debates, and he got 5% of the vote, less than 10%. And what we found is voters just are not willing to waste their vote on an independent because they're afraid that the party they really hate will then win. Negative partisanship is so important these days. The other big failing was, and I tried to get this independent movement, and again, this was also a growing community. You had Unite America. There's another thing called the Serve America Movement, SAM, that is actually a political party on the ballot in New York. There's something now called the Alliance Party. There's the Common Sense Party in California. These are all centrist, independent type movements. But the great failing is they purposefully refuse to adopt a platform or any set of principles because their message is both parties are terrible, the system is broken, and the duopoly support us. Well, the problem is if you're running for office, the voters might be, okay, that's interesting. What are you going to do about abortion? What do you think about guns? What's your stand on healthcare? Voters actually care about what are you going to do for them and their community. And this movement is unwilling. I mean, purposely, I've been in arguments with them about this. They will not adopt positions on issues because they're afraid that they'll, if we're pro-life, we're going to lose these people. Well, it goes nowhere, therefore.
Right.
So Unite America, their board after the debacle they debated and voted that they should become now an organization dedicated to electoral reform. And their big effort right now is on ranked choice voting, which again, I think is great, but it's not going to save democracy. I mean, I live in a state that has every sort of electoral reform you can imagine other than ranked choice voting. We don't register by party. We have the top two primary. There's no gerrymandering. Still, you like nothing but Republicans and Democrats. So that whole movement, it crashed and burned.
Okay, so, and that's where I wanted to go through some of the nuance of what you said, because it sounds like you've solved one of the problems, which is the candidates didn't have a policy stand on. So you've been out here promoting this thing called One Nation, One Nationism. Will you tell us a little bit about what that means and why you think that that could be an attractive platform?
Yeah, definitely. So the term is British. If anybody here follows British politics, all the way back to the Industrial Revolution through their Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, basically the moderate Tories referred to themselves as one nationists. And the idea is that far left class warfare doesn't work. It's not good for society. Socialism is not good for society. On the other hand, laissez-faire capitalism without any sort of safety net it doesn't work, and it's not good for society. What we need is a set of moderate reforms to maintain the capitalist system, maintain economic growth, but with a robust safety net so people can have a place if they're on the wrong side of the economy. And this philosophy has a clear label in Great Britain. You say to somebody, I'm a one nation Tory, they know exactly what you mean. It's like saying I'm a pro-life Republican or whatever. They know what that means. Their moderates here have never had that sort of identity. And I firmly believe that we're looking at a situation right now where once again you have like three or four alternatives. You've got the Bernie Sanders, AOC, democratic socialism on the left, which is socialism. And on the right, you've got Trump's nationalist populism, which is a culture war run amok. But in the center, there is one nationism, which is to say that we need to do things like strengthen Social Security. We need to get health care to the remaining 10% of Americans who don't have it. We need to take climate change seriously. We need, and package that as an ideology and a set of principles and policies and use, I like the term one nation, but if there's something else, use it over and over again until Americans understand that there is an actual philosophy and a clear ideology around the center. And I hope that right now, both parties were basically one nation parties throughout most of the 20th century. Woodrow Wilson was certainly a one nation. Teddy Roosevelt was. The Republicans lost that under Harding and Coolidge and Hoover, but got it back. I mean, the Republican Party never seriously tried to get rid of Social Security and the New Deal. Both parties were basically one nation parties until recently.
Yeah.
And we need to get back to that and put a label on it.
So, Chris, I want to push you here because everything that you just laid out as a potential platform for one nationism really appeals to me. So this is not a criticism of those ideas, but you mentioned yourself that when you were going around Washington State, you knew that the base that you stood in front of didn't support you. And I think what you just said is one nationism, the solution to one of the problems for why a centrist effort didn't work, is the same. We're going to run into the same issue that you were running into before. It's that the base doesn't like it in the Republican Party. So do you think that Americans support one nationism already? Do you think that there's a constituency that just doesn't fit into one party right now? Or
Yes.
Will it take some convincing and persuasion to build a governing coalition that can support a party?
The Republican Party will not support one nationism right now. It is antithetical to, the things I'm talking about, for instance, free trade. That's very much a one nation idea. And immigration reform and expanding healthcare. No, the Republican Party is not going to support this sort of centrist one nation philosophy. The question is the Democrats. Because again, Bernie Sanders is not a one nation moderate. The entire infrastructure of the left, the Justice Democrats, that's the political action committee that exists to support the far left Democrats who are challenging in primaries the other Democrats. Basically the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, they're not one nationist. But who is the moderate governing center of the Democratic Party. Basically, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden are one nation moderates. Now, on the specifics, they're a little farther left than I would want to be. I mean, my specifics, if you're asking me to design a healthcare reform system, look a little different than what Joe Biden's proposed, but the core of it would be the same, which is we need to use the power of government and subsidies to get affordable healthcare coverage to everyone. How exactly to do that could be a little different, but the Joe Biden is basically running as a one nation moderate.
Yeah.
And if that is going to be the governing philosophy of the Democratic Party, then I'm all in. But the civil war in the Republican Party is over. Trump won. The civil war in the Democratic Party goes on.
Okay, so then I've already asked you this question, but I'm going to ask it again in a slightly different way. So let's say that Pete Buttigieg becomes the Speaker of the House and Amy Klobuchar becomes the majority leader of the Senate for the new Democratic majorities. Would Chris Vance become a Democrat, and would you encourage all of us to become Democrats as well to really harden that center and make sure that it stays on top?
The short answer is yes. If it was clear that the Democratic Party was going in that direction, then it makes no sense to create a third party, because there wouldn't be that much difference. And certainly not, I don't believe you can go back to the Republicans. Again, people have urged me, oh, Chris, go back and fight for your party and stuff. Well, the problem is, I know exactly what that looks like. That means you have to walk into a room with a whole bunch of people and ask them to vote for you as chairman or something. And why should they when they completely disagree with you? I mean, at the moment when I realized that I'm the one out of step with all the rest of these Republicans in the room. They're not out of step with me. I'm out of step with them. And it's their party now. So I think there's two possible futures out there. If the Democrats are going to be a one nation party, then I think yes, we should join them. And help them defeat the left wing of the Democratic Party. If not, then we're going to need a third party.
Okay. So let's go to that scenario, because I think it's probably, my personal opinion, it's far more likely the Democrats are going to go the way that the Republican Party did, which means they're just going to go closer to its extremes. I think we're going to see AOC run for office in 2024 for president. I think she'll be unstoppable. I think if not her, it'll be somebody who definitely is going to include her in the cabinet or on the ticket in a major way. So if that's the case, what do you think needs to happen for a one nation candidate to win? Do you think it's going to take a massive mobilization effort in the 2022 primary? Do you think it's not going to be viable until the 2024 congressional elections? How do you game out the system where Democrats go further left?
Well, first of all, I would challenge your premise. If we just had parties go through different battles, the biggest and the most definitional is the battle for the presidential nomination. We just had that in the Democratic Party, and the AOC, Bernie Sanders wing of their party got crushed. Okay? After doing well initially, Bernie Sanders then lost every state by wide margins. I think right now that among the Democratic base voters, the moderates have a big advantage. I think most Democrats still see themselves as Obama, Clinton, Biden moderates, not socialists. And if Biden wins, he'll use, I was state party chairman when George W. Bush was in office. The RNC was just a wing of the White House. Biden will use the infrastructure of the Democratic Party to keep it in the center. And you'll be able to say to people, look, we ran as moderates and we won. So if Biden wins, I think the Democratic Civil War will continue, but I don't think I think it'd be the earliest that the left could take over in that scenario would be if President Biden chooses not to run for a second term and then they nominate somebody from the far left in 2024. That's way down the road. If Biden wins, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to keep the Democratic Party in the center. Now, God forbid, if Biden loses, I think then the socialist wing of their party is emboldened. They'll be like, yeah, we told you so. You can't win with the moderate. And then we need to get to work to create a third major party. Parties are usually created from the top down. I think that a lot of the folks who are leaders in the Never Trump movement are going to need to get together and talk about how do we raise the money? How do we create the infrastructure? And at some point, do what the Republicans did at Ripon, Wisconsin in 1854, have a big meeting, bang a gavel, and convene a new party. I think it's going to take that kind of a big bang moment. But that's not going to be possible as long as there's hope that the D's are going to be in the center. Again, a little inside baseball. In February, Evan McMullin convened a meeting in Washington, D.C. that met before that Convention on Principles. About 50 of us in a room, and everybody there believed that Sanders was going to be the Democratic nominee. And we all basically agreed, okay, we're going to need to get serious about forming a new party. And we had the people in the room to do it. Former governors, former Congress. But then South Carolina came along and Joe Biden won and he kept winning. And all the steam came out of that movement. So I keep saying this, it's all very dependent on what happens with the Democrat Civil War.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're waiting on the Democrats' battle to occur, I do think Joe Biden is going to win in 2020. That's certainly our goal as a group. And you say that he's going to hold the center and keep the Democrats a center party. I guess in the meantime, you think the Republican Party is going to devolve further into authoritarianism and nativism. What should we do in the meantime while we're twiddling our thumbs and waiting for the Democratic primary or Democratic Civil War to resolve?
Well, that's hard. As I said, eventually people like us need to make a decision whether if you can't go back to the Republican Party, whether you just remain an independent or join the Democrats. And there's going to be a moment when you have to make that leap. There'll be a moment when I'll have to make that decision. I don't know exactly when it's going to be. I do think, again, if Biden loses, God forbid, then that day of reckoning will come much sooner. But if Biden wins, we might have to make a decision. And also, I think very much dependent on the local situation. Like, let's say there's somebody here on this call who lives in a congressional or legislative district where the race in 2022 could be between a far left Democrat and a far right Republican. Well, maybe any of you out there, you ought to consider running as a moderate Democrat and to get involved and try and to win that seat. I think it's going to be all dependent on circumstances and specifics and people's personalities.
Sure. So I'm going to go to questions from our audience. So folks, please get your questions in now. We'll go to you in just a second. While those are coming in, I just want to ask you the question. What would you say to a group, Chris, that sees what the Justice Democrats are doing on the left, and they get excited about the idea of replicating it, but with the goal of moderating the Republican Party? And the reason why I ask it is because the Justice Democrats say something, or they say, we don't like the corporate Democrats. We don't think that they're good for the country, but we only have a two-party system. And so we have to work within. So they're basically building a para-party structure within, and then their goal is to cannibalize the party eventually. So do you think that a bunch of center-right Republicans could run for office, like maybe let's say for city council and state house, and then say, I am a Republican, but I'm not the grand old party. I am a one nation Republican. Do you think that would you encourage that? Do you think it's viable?
No, it's not viable right now. And in a perfect world, that's what should happen. In a perfect world, those of us who are never Trump should have joined together to defeat him and fight for control of the Republican Party. But the reality of that is it just doesn't work. Now, I'm here in beautiful Sumner, Washington, about 30 miles south of Seattle. Washington State has always been a place where, since the Depression, the Democrats were the majority party, but we were a very viable minority, and we often won things. We elected governors and senators, and we would often have a majority in one house or the other of the legislature. And the way we did it is by running as very moderate Republicans. Dan Evans was the 3-term governor of Washington State, and he was extremely moderate, pro-choice, created the State Department of Ecology. Slade Gorton was elected over and over again in this state as a very moderate Republican. So that kind of was our model. The moderates controlled the state party, controlled and nominated the candidates and won the elections. The reason that collapsed is because the voters in like the suburban areas, which are the key, were so disgusted by the national message that they wouldn't vote even for moderate elected officials. My friend Steve Litzow was elected a couple times to the state Senate from a very high income suburb of Seattle. He was pro-choice, he was anti-Trump, he was good on climate change. You couldn't be more moderate, and he still lost because the voters are not, the brand has become so toxic. And then beyond that, it's really hard now to get any support within the Republican Party, at least right now, unless you are absolutely loyal to Donald Trump completely and totally. One more thing, here in Washington again, there is an actual group called Mainstream Republicans, which are moderate Republicans that try and raise money and do what you said. They had a candidate for governor and a candidate for attorney general. They both got about 5% of the vote because the base looks for who is the Trumpiest conservative they can find. So fighting that battle within the Republican Party right now, at least in my experience, is impossible. It's better to go fight in the D party as a moderate.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's probably one of the clearest discussions of where to go next that we've had as a group, and so I thank you for that. And now we're going to go to some of our audience questions. So first we have Catherine, and I'll let Catherine ask whichever question you want. You've asked a couple, so I'll let you choose. Oh, you're muted. Oh, I think, all right. So I blocked her from unmuting herself, but that was not intentional. So let me fix that. All right. Okay, you should be unmuted now.
Yep, there we are. Hi, I just wanted to ask about the one nation conservative idea, because I follow British politics pretty well as well as American politics. And it concerns me because Boris Johnson identifies as a one nation conservative, kind of playing on that to become elected. My concern is that it's similar to what we see with Trump already, pretending to, work for the labor movement and the working man, but really putting policies in place that go against anything that would be wanted. And I see the same thing from Boris Johnson. So if you can just maybe elaborate on if my thinking is incorrect or how you feel about that.
No, I've read. I've never lived in Great Britain, but I try and follow what's going on there. One nationism is such a popular slogan that almost every Tory tries to adopt it. But truthfully, on social policy and economic policy, Boris Johnson is a very moderate one nation conservative. It's Brexit where he goes off the rails. It's Brexit where he deviates from the other one nation. Remember when they were having the big debate and the Conservative Party was coming apart? You had a bunch of old line one nation moderates leaving the Tory party. But there's a huge difference between where a one nation person is on trade, on taxes, on healthcare, on the role of government on everything than we're like a Donald Trump. Boris Johnson's really apparently a pretty good guy, other than Brexit, if that makes sense.
I would disagree.
Ridiculously.
I mean, he's dismantling the NHS. He's doing a lot of things that
Is he?
the Labor.
Is he really?
Yeah, I mean, Trump wants to get into the NHS, and they're starting to privatize insurance. They're looking into that. I wouldn't say everything but Brexit is good.
Then I will stand corrected. That would not be a one nation type policy. But his history, mayor of London, everything, he was a moderate one nationist, but he apparently has to go where the base of his party is right now. But I mean, if you follow it, would you agree with me that when you say one nation in Britain, people know what that means?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We don't have, the only term we have here is moderate. Well, what's a moderate? Nobody knows.
Yeah. I think we're starting to understand what a Lincoln voter is.
Right now we are. Oh, yeah,
maybe we can. There you go. I think that's the bigger movement. It makes more sense to people.
Yeah, but if you use, I think, and again, I'm open to using some other term, but I think one nation is so perfect for a lot of different reasons. Anyway.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I've got about 15 minutes, Reed.
Okay, great. Well, so the another question that we had is talking about what happens if Trump loses in November, and will it set off a scramble for leadership in the party? What if something does happen where there is a moderate who the moderate forces seem to somehow cobble together in the aftermath of Trump? Does that do we have to go back to the drawing board to figure out a new solution forward?
If what now? If Trump loses and...
Yeah, if Trump loses and Ben Sass starts to rise and party leadership and starts to speak in a more moderate way than what we've been hearing. He might not have been a great example, but if the tables get overturned and a more moderate voice takes command, what do you think would happen?
So I think it is possible, however improbable, so I got to start with this. I think of a political party as three tiers. At the very, very top, you have the elites, the elected officials, the party leaders, the big donors. Then you've got the next level down, which is the activists. The activists are the county chairs, people who go to conventions. Then the bottom is the base, which is the base voters. So in 2016, the elites and the activists hated Trump. Believe me, when I was running for the Senate, my son and I'd be driving around the state and to county conventions or party dinners. You'd pull into the high school gymnasium and there'd be Rubio signs and Kasich signs and Cruz signs. No Trump. Nobody supported Trump. But it turns out the base loved him. So it is not impossible that if the Republicans get creamed this election, the elites and the activists will turn to the base and say, do you ever want to win again? Or do you want the Democrats to run everything? We've got to move to the center. I have seen that happen. It's possible, but I don't think that's going to happen because the base now is so fired up. They are so committed to a certain set of core issues that if you deviate from them, they're just going to destroy you. And you'll have Trump and his family and the whole Trump infrastructure, even after they lose, will be out there yelling and screaming, trying to hold on to the party as it is. But so just imagine if some candidate came forward and said, we need to be more free trade and we need to, enough of this badgering our NATO allies. We need to be pro-NATO and we need to get back in the Paris Climate Accords and take climate. Do you think the base would tolerate that? I mean, so I just don't think that there's any chance that I don't think there's any chance that the current direction of the Republican Party is going to be changed anytime soon because the base won't allow it.
Okay. So the base of the Republican Party is dictating the output or the type of leaders that we get. That makes a lot of sense to me. the base of the Democratic Party, do they not have the same pull? Because I would identify the base of the Democratic Party to be left of Joe Biden. Do you disagree with me on that?
No, I disagree with you with that. The base is, remember, as I defined it, the base are the primary voters. The primary voters. And they voted for Biden in most states, and they voted for Biden by a wide margin. I think there is a battle going on in the Democratic Party, no doubt. But right now, I think the moderates are winning it. That's the difference. Their base is divided, but I think the majority is Biden, Obama Democrats, not Sanders, AOC Democrats. That's why right now I think it's almost more likely that you see AOC types leaving the Democratic Party, forming their own socialist party. I mean, AOC said something really interesting a few months ago. She said, you know, in any other democracy, Joe Biden and I would not be in the same party. And she's right. I think it's more likely you see the left break off from the Democrat Party than the left take over the Democrat Party, at least right now.
Yeah, well, that's
if you'd have
really
asked me this in February, I'd have agreed with you. I was out there saying it's doomed. They're going to nominate Bernie. Holy crap. We're going to have a choice between a socialist and a fascist, you know, but it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, well, I think so. One of my my biggest gentle criticisms of what you're positing is the influence of presentism, like the idea that because Joe Biden won the primary, that's the direction the party's going in. And because Trump is the GOP nominee, that's who's going to always be the GOP nominee. And I think the data, one of the articles that you wrote pointed to a 538 article about the fact that there's not a lot of independents that exist. Mm-hmm. We had Dr. Rachel Bidikofer on one of our rallies earlier this summer, who talked a lot about negative partisanship, as mm-hmm. you acknowledged on this call as well. So I fear that, I think what my question for you is, and we'll leave on these final thoughts your final thoughts is, do you think these are long-term trends? The Republican Party goes to authoritarianism, the Democratic Party continues to center, and it's just the role of Biden Republicans and never Trumpers to choose the Democratic Party and hope that it stays center?
I think that what's happening in the Republican Party is a long-term trend because it is driven by culture and race and religion. Again, so many Republicans are really motivated by one issue or the other: guns or religion, period. Abortion or the Second Amendment. And they are sincere in that. And they are, you know, it's America. You're allowed to believe what you believe. They are not going to move. And they're not going to support a party that moves at all on those issues. And then in addition, now you have so many of them that have completely bought the protectionist, isolationist, nativist, authoritarian type populism. So I don't see them moving. As I've said throughout this meeting, the question is the Democratic Party. What happens with them? Where do they go? I'm not much for predicting the future. You know, polls tell us where the election is today. And by the way, if the election were today, Joe Biden wins, period. New poll out today in Wisconsin. He's up 10 points. He's up 5 points in Florida. He's ahead of North Carolina. If the election were today, Biden would win. Going forward, I don't know. I mean, I think that the moderates in the Democratic Party have the advantage, but the socialists are certainly not going away, and they're going to keep fighting. And I think that the next big moment in American history, assuming